Hello crafty friends, it's Jess from jesscrafts.com, and today's card features Nook Designs and it is for their Inky Paws challenge. The challenge this month is to use watercolor, and you have to also use Nook Designs stamps, and you can also use the free digital stamps that they have on their site. I decided to combine the Wild About Zoo stamp set with the Simply Sentimental stamp set. I wanted the card to focus mostly on the sentiment, and I was going to do some embossed resist with the watercolor. I am going to prep my paper for embossing with this powder tool from EK Success, and instead of stamping in Versamark and using colored embossing powder, I'm going to stamp in a pigment ink and then use clear embossing powder to get a colored embossing powder look. So I'm starting with the sentiment because I'll base everything around that, as I said, is the focal point for today's card. I stamped the scripty sentiment first, and then I'm going to add in the smaller sentiments. With this pigment ink, the ones I'm using are from Mama Elephant, but any pigment ink will do the same thing. They take a while to dry, and so you can emboss with them. But in order to get a really good crisp impression, I find that it's best to put the embossing powder on quickly, because sometimes parts of it will dry faster than others, and it doesn't stay sticky quite as long as Versamark ink. So I am going to be adding powder after each thing that I stamp, just to make sure that I get a really good even coverage. And it's going to be key, because if there's a part that misses the embossing powder and doesn't get the melting over it, then it won't do the resist technique that I'm going to do later on. And in fact, when I add water, it could start smearing about. So in other circumstances, it wouldn't be such a big deal if there was a small bit that didn't get embossed, because the only difference would be that that area would be shiny versus matte. But in this particular case, because I'm doing an emboss resist technique, it's super important that it all gets embossed well and the colors won't fade. I'm also going to be doing a monochromatic look on this card, so I am going to be layering some pink and ultimately red watercolor over this. And so again, it would make it difficult to read the sentiment if it wasn't embossed really clearly. After I add in the sentiment, I'm going to take those hearts from Wild About Zoo. The Wild About Zoo stamp set features these really cool patterned hearts with like a cheetah pattern and a zebra pattern, and I chose to use just one of the large pattern hearts, but there's also a really great solid heart in there that helps kind of balance out the size and creates a little trail. And as you can see, I kind of had to think carefully about where I might layer this in. I was hoping to maybe get 2 or 3 of the large hearts in here, but I found that where I'd placed the sentiment didn't really allow me to get a heart underneath the sentiment, and so I decided to fill it in just with those smaller solid heart sentiments. So just as before, I'm going to stamp something, or stamp an image, place the clear embossing over it, stamp another image, place the clear embossing over it, until I have it filled out the way that I like. In that top right corner there, I have a little gathering of 3 hearts, and I felt like the bottom left-hand corner wasn't weighted properly. Like it was really heavy up there in the top right, and so I needed some hearts in the bottom left to balance it out a little bit. And so I'm going to add them. Like I said, I tried to put in the larger heart, but this spacing was just not right, and I have to settle with just using some of the smaller hearts instead. I'm going to continue to cover that with clear embossing powder. This is a piece of 140-pound cold-pressed watercolor paper from Canson, and I cut it with the stitched rectangle die from Lawn Fawn. I like to cut a lot of panels with that die because I like the finished edge that it gives, and I also feel super comfortable just working on that surface, and then if I like what I produced, I always know I can quickly mount it and put it on a card base. And so once I get those hearts down there and I think that everything's pretty well balanced, I'm ready to start watercoloring. I'm using the Koi watercolor sketch box, and I'm starting by putting water all over the paper because I want it to create kind of a wash of color. I don't want it to be too dark, and I want to make sure everything's flowing really well. So I took the water brush just clean with just water and spread it all over, and then I'm starting to add in some color. I'm trying to create a pink, and this particular set of watercolors doesn't really have a true pink. Instead, I'm just watering down the red. And in the end, I like the way that it turns out, but I was concerned that the red would make it too difficult to see the sentiment, and was hoping for maybe more of a pink color, but I think it actually worked out really well. And I'm trying to create a very sort of free-flowing artsy look here. So after I layer on some color, I spray it so that the edges get soft. And I tap off any of those pools that tend to gather along the sides, because I don't want those streaks that are caused from the running, but instead just kind of have it look a little bit more like just, drops and natural pools of the watercolor in certain areas that I want to highlight, but not that runny sort of lines that are created towards the edges. So I just have a paper towel on hand to catch those, and I just keep layering color until I like it, and I keep my heat gun handy so that I can dry things and make sure that I like them. And I also did a little bit of flicking with the watercolor, and when I do the flicking, I like to make sure that there's not a lot of water, and instead really heavy on the paint, and then flick it on by just taking the paintbrush and tapping it against my finger. I don't know that this particular brush is really very good for the flicking technique, because I was getting a lot of problems. I wasn't getting as much ink out of it as I wanted to, and it might be because it's that slanted brush, where a more of a pointy brush would have worked better in this instance. I'm definitely not an expert in different kinds of brushes. I kind of just experiment and play and see what I like, but I'm trying to learn over time what brushes are better for which techniques and that kind of thing. Once I finished my watercolor panel, I made sure that I put a lot of adhesive on the back, because even though it's really thick watercolor paper, there was some warping, and I placed it on a gray cardstock mat. And then I will again use quite a bit of adhesive to really make sure that it sticks down, because this panel is a little bit warped and it's pretty heavy, thick paper. But then I'll just place it onto a folded white note card, and that will be it for my card today. I hope you enjoyed this little bit different look for me, something a little bit more artsy, and I hope you'll join us over at Newton's Nook Inky Paws for this challenge to create a watercolor card. I will link all the products in the video description down below. If you like this video, you can give it a thumbs up. If you're interested in more crafty videos, you can subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching. Bye.